Once you get to retirement, you're not going to be able to live the same lifestyle you live today, even if you max everything out in your 401k for your whole working career, because inflation just makes it so much more expensive to live. And that 401k is not going to grow quick enough to sustain you. And that's why Boeing is fighting for this, because they realize that this is a losing battle. Having a 401k as our only option is a loss for us in the future. We recognize that.
Welcome back to another episode of Daily Dollar. Today we're going to be talking about Boeing. Boeing machinists are currently on strike because of their 401k plan. They had a pension 10 years ago. Boeing implemented a 401k plan that, honestly, they're just not happy about. And then they want to go back to having their pension, and because their 401k is not working for them. And so it got us thinking, how can we use this to help our listeners understand, is your 401k also going to be good enough and working for you? I'm Nate Crandall, joined by Mike Neubauer. We do these podcasts for one simple reason. People were not created to simply run a rat race and wait for retirement. We both have personal stories that led us to this point. And the truth is, life is just too short to settle for good enough. Mike, as we think about Boeing and what these machinists are going through, talk a little bit about pensions, talk about what they had before, and talk about what they have now and why there's such animosity and frustration with these machinists that work for Boeing towards the company that they've dedicated a lot of time to.
Yeah, so we'll back it up. I'm not going to hit the dates perfectly, but I'll be pretty close. I've done quite a few presentations on this, and in the presentations, we have the exact dates, but in general, we'll kind of walk through the timeline. So talk early 1900s, 1920s-ish, and workers are looking for jobs. Employers want to find good workers. The hardest thing is to retrain a worker. Once somebody is in your company and they're working, you want them to stay for as long as possible, because retraining a worker is very difficult if you have a ton of turnover. So you also have at that time, no OSHA, very dangerous jobs, going down into coal mines, building, steel structures, working on railroads, very dangerous jobs. So how do you get somebody to do a dangerous job and do that dangerous job for very little pay so you can be profitable and work for you for a long time doing that? How do we solve this problem? So what employers did back then, they started doing a pension plan. They said, listen, we know that you're not making a ton of money. You're making good enough money. We know that you can provide for your family, but we recognize that it's a dangerous job. Here's the deal. You commit to this time frame for us, call it 30 years. You commit to that, and we will pay you for your work, but we will also take care of you when you are no longer able to work. When you get to an age when you can't keep doing this job, we will keep paying you as a benefit to say thank you for committing so much time to our company and helping us. That's a pension. Well, at the time when they did that, two things. People did not live for a long time. They thought people aren't going to live till their 60s, maybe 70. I don't know the exact numbers without pulling it up, but people weren't meant to live a long time. So this is going to work well. You work for longer than you're going to be retired for in theory. Well, fast forward now 50 years, now we're in the 70s, and all of a sudden these pensions are having to pay out. But guess what? Employers use money for other things. They started pulling from retirement accounts that they were supposed to hold to pay for these pensions. All of a sudden, they don't have the funds to pay for all these employees that are now retired because they mismanaged funds for so long. Also, doctors are making people live longer. So all of a sudden, the guy that was supposed to die from the coal mine at age 60 is now 75. So they're paying 15 years longer on the benefit than what they thought they were going to have to. So, of course, our wonderful country of Wall Street and Washington, they get together and say, we got to solve this problem. This isn't going to work. They come up with the 401k and the IRAs and the different retirement plans that say, we will allow employees to save for their retirement, but once they're done, they have to go and take care of themselves. If they live 10 extra years, that's on them. If they run out of money, that's on them. It's not on us. So the problem becomes, but how do we solve the other two problems? How do we get somebody to work for a lower wage? How do you get them committed to your company for a long time? That's where the 401k and the IRA benefits and consequences come in, and they craft the way and say, if you put money into the 401k, we won't tax you today. So that's a benefit. That's the carrot. The consequence is you have to work until age 59 and a half. You can't touch this money. So now we've locked you in for your best working years without taking responsibility of providing for you afterwards. You have to have that responsibility. So they build this system out. Everything is going to be great. The employees think, whatever, this is what we got. We'll start doing it. Of course, it's hard to catch on. So as pensions fade away and 401ks come into, vogue, we're in the 70s. It's not until 90s, early 2000s that a lot of these companies are able to start getting rid of their old systems and bringing in the 401k model. But now we're hitting the 30-year mark, right? We're hitting where people are starting to see what are the consequences of no pension and only 401k money. What does that look like? Okay, Social Security benefits are not as great as once promised. That is possibly going to run dry. I didn't know enough about a 401k to even know how it works or make good investment choices. So I had to hire somebody else to do it, or we just use Fidelity or whatever, and they take their management fee automatically. So the returns that I should have hit, I actually have less money than I expected. And now I'm looking, how long am I going to live for? Oh, I'm going to live for a long time, and healthcare and all costs are through the roof right now compared to when I started this in 1995. So everything is stacked against me now. I'm kind of screwed because there is no way for me to solve this problem. And you're seeing now with Boeing that their employees are on strike and they see the writing on the wall. We are seeing now the consequences of only a 401k system, and we see what happened with the benefits of a pension plan. We're fighting to not be stuck in the 401k boat because we realize that we take all the risk, all the responsibility, all the consequence, and there's middlemen at Wall Street all the way in the middle. And of course, Wall Street and Washington make these laws together, not to support the employee necessarily, but for other purposes possibly. So all these laws are set against them, and now people are seeing what the outcome of that is. And that's where we are today. And that's why Boeing, like it or not, strike or not, however you feel about all that, the reality is the reason they're fighting for this is because they see the downfalls of the 401k and they're realizing that's not sufficient enough. That's not going to work. So if that hasn't worked from, say, 1994 to 2024, what is the likelihood that that plan is going to work from 2024 to 2054? And Boeing just happens to be the one in the news right now that's trying to get ahead of that, saying our employees today, by the time 2040 comes, a 401k is going to be so obsolete that they're going to be struggling to survive. We are fighting today to avoid that. And that kind of brings us to the point of what we want to talk about within this article is if you're banking only on a 401k as your retirement strategy, you might want to look back at history to see how this has progressed. And it has gotten worse year after year for the employee as far as responsibility and risk. And if we keep going down this path, what is the likelihood that it gets so risky and too much responsibility on the employee that people just can't afford to live in retirement?
It's really interesting because a lot of these articles that you and I are talking about, it's the same headline, right? The topic is still the same, but I mean, across Forbes, Barron's, Reuters, NPR, I mean, they're all talking about this current strike that's happening out in Seattle. These are the same companies that also print articles about 401ks and the benefits and how great they are and are you saving enough and you should save more and here's some hot, investments that you should invest in within your 401k. So it's a little ironic that they're talking about this current situation that's happening out there with Boeing. My first thought, and what a lot of the listeners might be thinking of is like, well, yeah, but when pensions were kind of not the standard anymore and 401ks became more relevant, I believe it was 1972 is when they were created. Throughout the 70s and 80s, pay increased at that same time. And I think that was maybe a similar carrot, like you were talking about, hey, we can defer these taxes on your 401k dollars for the future. That's a good carrot. But I think also it was like, well, now the company isn't trying to save for your future pension. So now we have more money available. You were making $7 an hour. Now we can bump it up to $10 an hour. But now you have a 401k. And so back in those times, people were like, well, that's great. And, now I just got a 30% raise. This is awesome. And anything I save, I'm not getting taxed on it. This is fan. Like I can understand the mindset of people in the 70s and 80s, why it would make sense. But once you're then spending those dollars, did you make wise choices during that 30 years of your career where you were tasked with setting up your 401k appropriately and investing on your own or picking, from the short kids menu of options that they give you, right? Like here's the 5 investments that you can do, pick one. And then most people who don't understand 401ks are like these guys. These guys are machinists building airplanes. They don't understand financial planning and investment planning and things like that. They just said, okay, I'm going to pick this option. And then they set it and forget it. And then that option plays out over the next 30 years. And now a lot of these guys are sitting, and girls are sitting there, in 2024, getting ready to retire to say, hey, my 401k does not have enough money. I didn't do this appropriately. And now you're expecting me to leave Boeing and get taxed on these dollars as I try and live into my 80s. Like it just, the snowball of it, I think, wasn't realized back in 1972. by either the 401k creators or the companies who adopted the 401k as their plan instead of a pension. I don't think this snowball was really foreseen when they created that.
Yeah, well, a few things. So we'll talk about first the carrot of, well, you got kind of a pay raise, let's call it. Wages are able to rise. Okay, that's great, but that's also a carrot to get you to fall for the system. And we just have to give you this carrot for a short time to get you to make that transition and think that pensions are bad, 401ks are good. And the truth is neither is good or bad. It's just knowing how to use it. But we're going to get you to take all this risk and responsibility, and it takes a small carrot at the end of the day. So we're getting rid of all this responsibility. So now you take that carrot. But this is all Washington and Wall Street together. So now we get everybody switching to that system. You got what feels like a 30% raise. But now inflation is going through the roof. You know, the 80s inflation is going up. We have a huge inflation spike right now. And all of a sudden, that carrot that we had to give for a short time, it was a short-term carrot because now prices are rising quicker than wages are rising. So that carrot is all of a sudden washed away. And Washington now has this plan where they have to inflate dollars just to avoid having the debt responsibility that they've taken on. And the way you solve that quietly, we've talked about a million times, but it's through inflation. When inflation rises, that debt gets a lot easier for them to handle. So inflation is rising. At the same time, you took all this risk and responsibility, and it's all because you fell for the carrot back in the day of a slight wage increase. Now that has shifted 180 because the reality is now they do, an employer match. So let's say the employer will match, even if they give you $20,000, they'll say, this is our benefit. Well, the truth is you'd be better off just saying, don't match my 401k. Just give me 20 grand more on my salary and I'll manage it. I'll put it in my bucket and we'll figure it out. But the mindset has shifted away from that. And it has proven that people will buy for that benefit. They'll take a job for that benefit over the 20 grand. But the reality is the employer now only has to pay that benefit sometimes. If you put in to get the match, they have to match it. But if that was a wage, they would have to pay it to everybody to be able to use that money. So that really becomes a problem is you put that responsibility, you put all that risk on the employee. We all know, like you said, not to say machinists don't know financial planning, but as a majority, that's not their field of expertise. I'm sure there's some that are great, but that's not their field of expertise. So now you give all that risk and responsibility to somebody with no education on it. And then how does Wall Street solve that problem? All the people step in and say, hey, for this percent, a cut of your money, I'll show you how to do it. I'll manage this for you. You're not going to figure it out. Give me some of your money. And a whole financial advising industry blows up on Wall Street. ETFs, all these 401k plans blow up. And all it really is a middleman because these people have responsibility and risk. They realize I have no idea how to do this. So a middleman inserts himself and says, hey, we'll take this on. But they don't take any of the risk or responsibility. They're just managing the money. It's not actually losing money for them if they do a poor job. So all they're doing is taking a cut and there's no risk or responsibility shifted at all. So, it's honestly tough because you see this and it is a struggle for people. And now you see prices rising at rapid rates. People don't understand the inflation and how it affects them. And if you thought $1 million in the 401k 10 years ago, like, man, that's going to be enough to live on. I can survive. And now you look at, because of the inflation in the last few years, $1 million in the 401k is pennies. And you think back to the 1990s, most people didn't have $1 million in their 401k. They were going to live on Social Security and a little bit of savings and a few sprinkled in pensions. Nobody had that kind of money. So they just don't realize that risk and responsibility that comes because you don't get to control the inflation piece. So when you take that risk on, you don't get control of some of the variables. And if inflation rises quicker than you can save for retirement, you're just screwed. There's just no way to overcome that with a 401k plan, and the way it's set up. So that's a hard thing for me to read this article and realize because there's just real human beings that have committed to Boeing to work hard, build planes that we fly in. And at the end of the day, the corporations are saying, we're not taking that risk and responsibility. We're not paying you. They offered them like 30-some% raises to avoid switching that responsibility back to the employer. Because the reality is the employer sees how terrible of a deal that is for them to be responsible. They do not want that responsibility. And this is kind of one of the first times you see that employees are realizing we don't want their responsibility either. This is a terrible deal for us now. 10 years ago, we were kind of screwed and we took this deal, but we realize now how big of a mistake that was to take all that responsibility on ourselves. I am super excited to introduce to you the Doctors and Dollars 5-Day Financial Challenge. I'm Mike Neubauer. I'm CEO of Grand Vision Companies, and I'm the one that you see on the Wealth Wednesday and Daily Dollar episodes with Nate. So Nate and I are partnering again to do something even more exciting, which is the 5-day challenge. We're taking the best of all of our episodes, all of our expertise and knowledge, and we're condensing it into an impactful and purposeful 5-day presentation, 1 hour per day, for 5 days, to give you everything you need to build that foundation for your financial future. So if you're looking to gain the pieces, you want those puzzle pieces and find out how they fit in your financial plan, head over to the Doctors and Dollars website, join us on the 5-day challenge. We're putting it together for free, so you got nothing to lose. We look forward to seeing you on the inside.
Absolutely. I think you nailed it. As you were talking there, I pulled up both of them. I got the Reuters and the Forbes article up here on my other screen. And as I was trying to think of my next question, I just recognized, like, in the picture, the people who are out there with the picket signs, a lot of them I would guess are around age 50. And so then what I was going to ask you is, like, who do you think is impacted more? The 30-year-old, maybe not even 30, the 40-year-old who got a taste of the pension, like in 2010 to 2013, and then they froze the pension. It was early 2014 is when Boeing got rid of the pension. They froze that traditional pension style. So it's like, who is impacted more? The one who got a little bit of taste of the pension, but most of their career they've been saving within a 401k? Or is it the guy who started with Boeing in 1985, has enjoyed that pension up through 2014, and now he's getting ready to retire, and he only had like maybe 5 years of the 401k? Either way, though, I think you answered the question without me ever even bringing up the topic, is because of inflation. Right? The older guy who has this frozen pension, he's still going to get some money from this pension, certain dollar amount, and then he has a little bit of 401k dollars. He's going to be impacted by inflation because that pension amount is not going to increase over time. Like, that's a set amount that he's always going to get. And the monthly value of that pension disbursement to him each month, the buying power that he has is going to be lost over time because of inflation. On the same sense, the younger guy who got a little bit of pension but has really had to save into the 401k, that's exactly what you said. Are they saving enough? Are they investing in the right ways to outpace inflation to be able to perform better over these next 20 years of their career and then retire, at some point in the future? Are they going to have the same buying power? I don't think there's one that's better than the other. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I'll tie it back around just because I think most of the physicians don't even have a pension plan, unless you're coming from the military side of things. So we'll kind of tie it back all around to the point of how does this affect physicians, right? And what you're talking about is buying power in the future and so on. So most have a 401k. A 401k is really built for kind of middle America. It's not built for people who make 300, 500,000 a year, because the max you can put in is low 20,000 per year. The reality is that can't be your vehicle. Even if you max out your 401k, your IRA, whatever it is, once you get to retirement, you're not going to be able to live the same lifestyle you live today, even if you max everything out in your 401k for your whole working career, because inflation just makes it so much more expensive to live. And that 401k is not going to grow quick enough to sustain you. And that's why Boeing is fighting for this, because they realize that this is a losing battle. Having a 401k as our only option is a loss for us in the future. We recognize that. So if you have 401k, bring it back to the physicians. That's kind of the point, right? Is that you have to realize this is a losing battle. And the reason it's a losing battle is you can only put in low 20s, maybe you get a match, whatever, but you save that money up. If you get to retirement, let's say you even have $3 million in your 401k and you're like, this is great, but you run the numbers and you realize this isn't going to sustain me. Like, this basket of money is going to dwindle away over time via spending to stay alive, or via inflation where things just keep getting too expensive that I can no longer afford them. But now I'm past my prime working years. So I either keep working as long as I can, even though I'm past my prime, or I have to drastically reduce my living expenses and my lifestyle when I'm supposed to be in the golden years. I'm supposed to be traveling and living my life. But now I have to drastically reduce it because the reality is I only have this much money in this bank account. Social Security, we don't know what will be there, but likely not great. So we only have this much money, and you run out the math and you're like, if I live till 85, like, that's not going to be good. Like, I'm going to run out of money. And a 401k, if you're a physician, you got to probably be saving like $100,000 a year in a 401k, to start outpacing and keep up at the same level, because you're getting a late start on putting money into a 401k. You're supposed to work in the same time period, but you started way later and you're trying to make up for a bigger salary in retirement, it's just not going to work out the same for you. So you have to really think about outside investment options and how you're going to solve the problem, right? The purpose of bringing up this article is simply that don't go on strike and fight and say, we want pensions now from our, medical group. But the point is, this strike is so powerful because it is a statement that 401k is not enough for the employee going forward in the future. It is a tax strategy we talk about all the time. It is definitely a beneficial tax strategy. We're not saying don't use it, but it is not going to be good enough. And you have to recognize that if even the machinists at Boeing are realizing this isn't good enough, it may not be good enough for you as a physician. So you need to take a step back and say, okay, I'm going to use my 401k for its purpose. I'm not going to just abandon it, but I really need to be doing something more if I want to live in retirement the way my vision says that I want to live in retirement.
Yeah, and that was the point I wanted to make is they've got to be doing something more. You've said it before in a previous, I believe it was a Daily Dollar episode, that like the 401k is not a wealth building or investment strategy. It is a tax strategy. Good to have one. You can defer taxes this year up to $23,000. But when you're making $500,000 a year, that's just not a major impact from a tax standpoint. So you got to be doing more. You got to be saving, to your point, $100,000 a year. I like the analogy you just used, or the figures you just used of like, if you have $3 million in there, it probably feels great. But if you actually extrapolate that out, adjusted for inflation and market growth while you're in retirement, $3 million, let's say you live for 20 years, that's $150,000 a year. Like you went from making $500,000 a year to now you're living on 150. And we hear people all the time, and I heard this in a prior career as well, that like, oh, I can cut back, my house will be paid off and cars will be paid off and it will be just fine. Tell that to your spouse, right? Who's used to living on $500,000 a year for duration of your career, and all of a sudden it's, hey honey, hey husband, like all of a sudden we're on 150 a year at the time that we're wanting to travel and do all these things, and inflation has increased and the cost of everything has increased. It makes it very difficult, right? And so if you just rely on $3 million in your 401k, that's just not going to do it. You got to do more. And I think that's the point that you're trying to make. It's the point that I want to make, is like, it's a good tool, but it can't be your only tool. Like you can't just have one tool in the toolbox, one hammer. You got to have all the different tools to do the same thing.
Yeah. And I'll bring just one other point around with that. Is the other myth we hear all the time is, let's say you have 3 million in your bank account or your 401k, you can pull out, say, 4%. We'll talk about the 4% rule. You can pull out 4%. And it's like, well, that's based on a lot of controls in your equation. That's not based on variables, because the truth is you don't have control over those variables. So you think for 30 years, I'm going to plan on this, I'm going to pull out 4%. Well, all of a sudden, inflation is 8% and you're only returning 7% in your portfolio. And so all of a sudden you're losing purchasing power every year and you're pulling out 4% of your money. So every year that 3 million is becoming less valuable and less valuable. And people don't put those two and two together, because even if it says 3 million, but inflation now has risen, that 3 million doesn't buy what 3 million bought 10 years ago. So even if you're pulling out 4%, you're still not able to survive. You now have to start pulling out 5%, 6% just to keep up with what things cost. And when you do that, you start to see 3 million, 2.9 million, 2.5, 2.2. And you're like, wait, what is going on? How is this number going down? Or how is my ability to live in this world and buy things, pay for a vacation, pay for healthcare? How does it feel like I can't afford it anymore and I have the same amount of money? And that's that inflation point. And that's the variable that people miss when they say, whatever, I got 3 million, 5 million, 1 million in my 401k. I've saved forever. It's perfect. You miss the point that you're banking on a lot of variables going in your favor, and you don't have control over those variables. So all you're left with is one piece, how much money you have, and then how long you have to make that money last. But all those variables in between mean that anything could go wrong and it won't work as you wanted it to do, And I think just kind of tie it all around with a bow is that's why we focus on the cash flow side of things. It's not just real estate. It's not just private business. It's not just oil and gas. There's a million things. But the idea is you cannot have a bucket of money. You have to have a source of income, because that source of income continues to climb. If money from your investments hits your bank account month after month, you're going to be okay, because you're not pulling from a big pot of money. It's money hitting your bank account. If you have 3 million, and let's just say, to make numbers super easy, you got to pull out 10% or whatever to live on. It's your first year of income. So you pull out $300,000. Now you're at 2.7. So that number is dwindling down. Let's say there's a 10% correction in the market. You went from 3 million to 2.7 now. So now you have less money. If you're making 30,000 per month coming into your bank account in income because you've set up your retirement plan that way based on streams of income, not a pot of money that you pull from day after day, streams of income. Let's say your streams of income collapse by 10%, which is a huge collapse in cash flowing assets. Let's say somehow they go down 10%. You only went down 3,000 per month. Like, you can make that adjustment. You see 300 grand drop in your account value, that's going to have a major effect on you and how you live your life. So, talking about the 401k, I guess to kind of wrap it up and bring that home is a 401k is not enough. Even the Boeing machinists realize that now, and they're fighting hard to avoid that. So what is enough? How do you solve that problem then? Is you have to start buying your time back today and buy it back in chunks until you no longer have to work. You've bought back all your time. Now you are officially retired because you have streams of income hitting your bank account based on good investment strategy, not based on a 401k that just builds a big lump sum of money for one day in the future. You have streams of income, and now you have control over those variables and control over your lifestyle. So that's how you set it up to avoid these problems. You almost basically build your own personal pension plan. You invest in assets just like a pension would. A pension is going to invest in assets that provide income to them so they can pass it on to the people they promise those benefits. You basically build that for yourself. Is you have to say 401k, use it as a tax strategy for what its purpose is. But I need to build streams of income, which is my own personal pension plan. I'm going to take this money, invest in assets that pay me cash flow. So one day, just like a pension would continue to deposit money into your bank account once a month, those income assets will produce income into your bank account once per month, and you live forever on your personal pension plan.
Nailed it. I think that is the perfect final thought. It's the idea or the strategy that a lot of people don't see or they don't utilize. They're so focused on what's the easiest thing, what is provided to me, because then they think, okay, I have the 401k provided to me. How do I maximize this type of account? How do I make investment decisions within my 401k to maximize that pot of money, right? And they think that's growing their wealth and going to set them up better in life. And I think you nailed it. It's like, you could do that, but that's not the end all be all. You've got to create your own personal pension plan that provides you that comfort, right? It takes away some of that uncertainty. It knows, okay, when I turn 60, yes, now I can tap into this 401k that I've been using as a tax strategy during my career, but I've already built assets over here that are going to pay me no matter what, whether I'm in the office, whether I'm at home, whether I'm on a beach, this money's coming in. It just creates such stability and confidence as you're moving through your career.
Yeah. And I think one final thought is the fact that this strike, for instance, is pinning employer versus employee. Who should take responsibility? And the truth is, employee or employer, you should take responsibility for your own financial future. And if the truth is that a pension plan is much better, and you're saying, I want the employer to provide that for me, just recognize the employer is likely not going to provide that for you. But you want that certainty of a pension plan for the future. So get yourself financially educated and figure out, how do I build this personal pension plan for myself then? Because nobody's going to do it for me. So I recognize, the Boeing machinists recognize, the pension plan is really the answer. But no employer is taking that responsibility ever again. So that's not going to work. So how do we get the answer in a way that will actually work? You got to set it up for yourself. You have to do your own personal pension plan. And that's kind of what this article is proving, is that you have to do that. So you have to get educated. You have to learn, how do you set that up and take control for yourself to build your own pension plan, because the employer is not doing it for you. No matter how much you go on strike, they're not going to take that responsibility again. It's just too much for them. But it is the best thing. So you have to take responsibility for your own life, your own family, and say, all right, I know this is best. How do we set this up and make this work?
Absolutely. We'll be back again. We'll keep scanning the articles, reading through them, and then just bringing a no BS behind the scenes look at what's really going on and how it affects our listeners' bottom line. Talk to you later, Mike.
We'll see ya.